So they have money on the line. And guess what? Over 70% of the psychopathic students answered correctly and actually got that person. So I'm gonna let you sit back. So this means that they just proved the same thing twice. That psychopaths can basically sniff out vulnerability, but they can also sniff out things that you have if you have guilt as well too. So if we think of TSA and them sniffing out whether a person is carrying something or concealing something, they already know that you're doing it. They know who is not, who and which one is, actually doing it. And they know that when you're just walking through the TSA just feeling guilty because you're basically hijabbed up and you know that you're gonna have a random check. They know when you don't have anything. All right. So I know that this is making us feel like psychopaths are just like the ultimate predators. Like they're like tigers. They could swim, climb, run fast. They have claws. They're huge. Like there's just no escaping a psychopath. But Reed Malloy actually had a flip side to this experiment. Are we able to sniff out psychopaths as well as they're able to sniff out us? So he actually gathered 450 criminal justice and mental health professionals and asked them whether they experienced some sort of odd visceral reaction with being in the presence of a psychopath and violent criminals. So 84% of females said that they were able to sniff them out immediately. Like they said they had something stand up on their neck, like goosebumps and everything. And only 71% of males actually face this sort of visceral reaction. So surprisingly, this study actually showed that the people who had more so entry-level jobs such as like a bachelor technician, law enforcement, and they're just like a little bit lower on the chain, they actually said that they faced a repulsion and some sort of disgust as well when being in the presence of a psychopath. So the question is, what exactly are we picking up on when we're actually coming face to face with a psychopath? And Malloy says that this goes back to prehistoric time. So now we're gonna get into, a theory about where psychopaths may have come from. Why are they here in the human genome in general? So we're gonna ask whether it's from an anthropological position, why psychopaths are here, or is psychopathy basically just a clinical disorder or a clinical personality disorder? So Malloy says that this may be due to the game theory, and basically this is some sort of advantage due to what our ancestry basically had to face back then. It was a survival advantage, and we needed to have this due to the primeval ancestral environment. So he gave the example of war in, different wars inside the groups and also outside the groups. You had to worry about fighting wars with other tribes or troops. You actually had to deal with predatory environments. So get and eat in yourself. Seek and kill. You had to learn how to hunt. So being a warrior hawk would actually come very easy when it came to catching prey and preying on animals. So one of the questions is, how do we trust people who are warrior hawks, who love violence or more prone to violence in peaceful times where there are no wars, or maybe we have the food we need? So let's just take berserkers, who are actually the warrior class that was just like freaking out of control, a part of the Norse people. They were said to actually fight in a trance-like fury. Like when they fought, they were just they just became something else. Like it was their environment. Wars, raiding, all of that stuff was just their environment. Even though they were actually a dangerous elite that were there in order to protect the Vikings and the little Viking villages, they, in peacetime, they would actually turn against their fellow countrymen. and actually start to kill and pillage and rape them. And these are the people that they're supposed to be protecting. So, that goes to say, do we as human beings that do not have psychopathy, do we also have some sort of radar for people who are psychopaths? Like, if they could sniff us out, can I sniff you out? Because can we feel when a person is dangerous to us? Yes, okay? You are absolutely right. So it wasn't a coincidence that females actually had more of a visceral reaction when faced with dangerous people or dangerous psychopaths or dangerous criminals, because it actually proves to be true when you think about human condition. Women have a greater physical vulnerability than men usually do. Therefore, we have greater intuition. We can sense danger or pick up on things a lot quicker than a male can. And because you have people that are more vulnerable within society, they may feel more threatened. And because they feel more threatened, they are actually more at risk for some sort of attack. And because you're more at risk for some sort of attack, you basically have to tighten up. You got to protect yourself. And one of the ways that nature has gifted people who are more vulnerable is with some sort of a sense of intuition. So like I said, this goes for people who may have lower education or who may have a lower position as well too, or maybe even the elderly. This comes in handy for people who are very vulnerable in general. You're gifted with intuition. So never is natural selection going to be on some one-way street. There's always going to be a two-way street. And this intuition actually causes us to have a little bit more empathy. So if this means that if you can accurately predict where your prey is going to go, you can actually marginally increase your chances of survival.
Track of a group of kudu. These are the San people of the Kalahari Desert, the last tribe on earth to use what some believe is the most ancient hunting technique of all, the persistence hunt. They run down their prey. They start to feel the rhythm of the animal's movements from the spacing of the tracks. The group is not moving fast. The animals have taken fright. They will concentrate on the bull. He will be carrying a heavy set of horns and therefore will tire more quickly. To do that, they must separate him from the herd so that his tracks won't be confused by those of others. The sun is directly overhead and the men sense a change in the kudu's pace. He's slowing. After hours of tracking, they've entered an almost trance-like state of concentration. At times it's impossible to see any sign of the kudu's tracks, and the hunters must imagine the path it will have taken. The heat is hard on the hunters, but they're now close enough for the next stage in the hunt, the chase. This is the signal for it to begin. But only one man will undertake it, Karoe, the runner. He must be relentless. It's now a test of endurance. Who will collapse first, the man or the animal? Running on 2 feet is more efficient over long distances than running on 4. A man sweats from glands all over his body and so cools himself. A kudu sweats much less and has to find shade if it's to cool down. And a man has hands with which to carry water, so during the chase he can replenish the liquid he loses as sweat. Hours pass and Karoe is getting closer. But then the kudu runs into thick cover. tracks have disappeared. Karoe tries to put himself into the mind of the kudu, and himself reenacts the moment when it heard him approaching as it tried to rest in the shade. He deduces the direction in which it must have fled. It's close by. The chase has lasted 8 hours. Hunter and hunted are both at the end of their strength. Neither can go on much longer. And then the kudu collapses from sheer exhaustion. It's close to death. Karoe's spear throw now is scarcely more than a symbolic gesture. The hunter pays tribute to his quarry's courage and strength, with ceremonial gestures that ensure that its spirit returns to the desert sands from which it came. While it was alive, he lived and breathed with it and felt its every movement in his own body. And at the moment of its death, he shared its pain. He rubs its saliva into his own legs to relieve the agony of his burning muscles, and he gives thanks for the life he has taken so that he may sustain the lives of his family waiting for him back in their settlement.
So this is life or death. So if psychopaths are actually marked by their absence or lack of understanding people, which is basically empathy, or the lack of remorse, which also involves some sort of empathy, then how in the world can they have empathy? Because there are two different types of empathy. So how psychopaths untangle different moral dilemmas that we have in society, and how their brain responds depends on the type of empathy that they have. So actually, I want to give you an example for you all to understand the difference between warm empathy and cold empathy. Now, Philippa Foot actually had given us this example to see whether people can distinguish between hot empathy and cold empathy. So just imagine a trolley is hurling down a track, and there are 5 people on the track that cannot escape. There is a switch that can save them, but here's the kicker. There is another person down the track that will cause them to be killed. What would you do? Now, if you said that you're going to rescue the 5 people instead of 1, what is 1 to the 5, then you're just like normal human beings and psychopaths as well too. The obvious thing is save 5 people, and 1 person just gonna have to sacrifice their life. It's gonna have to be some sort of Armageddon, okay? But you also abide by utilitarianism, which says that you have to seek to get the greatest amount of pleasure for the greatest amount of people. So just a side note, when I started to read about utilitarianism, because I was just like, oh, utilitarianism, the greatest amount of pleasure for the greatest amount of people, good, cool, wonderful, okay? And then you start getting into the Federalist Papers and like everything, and then also being black in America and Muslim in America, you start realizing, hey, like, all right, so this means that the majority wins all the time. So basically, because it's more pleasure for the greatest amount of people, that outnumber you, then you don't deserve to have pleasure. So this is basically what happens in many societies, utilitarianism. So what if I said that one person was your favorite person in the world? Would you still kill 5 total strangers for that one? But that's off another thing. So anyway, this trolley, that same trolley is hurling down this track. And of course, the 5 people cannot escape. But there's this big, huge person in front of you. Like, huge, okay? They're tall and they're big. Always. They're huge, okay? They're wide. If you push that person in front of the trolley, it will stop the trolley. Would you push that person to save those 5 people's lives on the track? And see, that makes all the difference because it makes it more personable. Most people are going to be a little bit confused and confounded on making a decision about pushing a person because now it becomes personal. Now you have to physically do it. It's not just like just pull the lever and you don't even see the other one person that is off on the side on another track. Like, you killed him, okay, oh well, okay? It makes all the difference from just pushing a button or pulling a lever and dropping a bomb on a whole country rather than just going up to people and just shooting them. It makes a difference. Personal experiences make a difference. And so in case 1, it was impersonal. And so a person that even had cold empathy, which is based off of reason and rational thought, which involves, your prefrontal cortex and a whole slew of different parts of your brain, would do that. Would actually pull the lever and say 5-1 utilitarianism, we save 5 people instead of just 1. A person who did that would be using their cold empathy. But it changes when it becomes hot empathy, in case 2, when you actually have to personally push the man. So even if you're making the decision to do that, you're probably going to light up your amygdala, which is your part of the brain that causes emotional response. If a psychopath was making the decision to do that, nothing would show. Absolutely nothing in the amygdala would show. All the other parts, which is the cold empathy, would light up. The warm empathy is dealing with feelings and emotional and putting yourself in a person's shoes and what we traditionally know as empathy. But you also have to have a working amygdala that also lights up in order for it to do that. And psychopaths don't have that. So as we traditionally learn about empathy, we know that we have to feel each other in order to understand another person's approach and perception to life and gushy things, right? Psychopaths are better at one form of empathy than both of them. So we have cold and hot empathy. They're excellent in the cold empathy while we're splitting our empathy into 2 and just basically spreading ourselves thin. So these people are professional at rational thought. So basically, they know the buttons. They don't feel the heat when the button is pressed. That is exactly. They don't even think about it. They could sleep at night after they push that big guy. All right? So we're looking at people that have understanding rather than feeling, who may have some sort of nerveless prediction rather than a personal identification to people, or even may rely on symbolic pressing rather than symbiosis and learning how to conform to society, also to live with society in some sort of, circle of life thing. So this basically meant, if we use the berserkers, that the berserkers were even more ruthless than an average Viking soldier, because it's just like you harm the people that you're against as much as possible and don't even feel any remorse for the people that you kill. So Robert Dunbar says that every society needs a set of individuals to do society's dirty work. Someone who is not afraid to make tough decisions, ask uncomfortable questions, and put themselves in a line. Based on the nature of the task that they are asked to do, they aren't going to be people that you're necessarily going to say, hey, why don't you come to my family picnic and come sit and chat and play a game with me. They're not necessarily going to do that. They're the dirty workers. Those are the people that go back home and drink at night and just flick on television alone. Come back to their family and say, I don't want to talk. It's been a long day. But don't actually mean that. It kind of reminds me of that Mindhunter dude. Yeah, the same guy that played the king on Hamilton. The way he is, just like, could totally just separate work. Like, you're dealing with heinous criminals and you're just like, this is so interesting. And then your whole life is falling to shambles, but you're just like, but criminals are interesting. That's what that basically reminds me of. So 90% of the people would refuse to push the big person if they had the chance to do it. And there's a minority out there that had no qualms of just pushing that person into doing that, because it just basically creates a balance. Utilitarianism. When they actually presented this to students, it was the same thing. People who were more psychopathic pushed the person, and the people who were not was just like, oh, I don't know. Maybe, no, I'm not gonna do it. So let's fast forward to modern day society and how psychopaths can actually be advantageous. So there was a study that actually asked different CEOs and people in high positions, what does it take to be in your profession? What kind of traits do you need to have for high achievement in your profession? And guess what? So those key personalities that I said before about the manipulative, superficial charm, the insensitive, high work ethic, focus, all of that stuff, those are what CEOs say. You can't be sensitive. You gotta do what you need to do in order to get it done. You can't worry about what other people are saying to you. You can't worry about feelings and emotions and gushy stuff and hot empathy. These are business leaders, CEOs making millions of dollars. Sometimes you have to be willing to step on other people to get to the top, and that's just how it is. Business is business, guys. So these key personalities were actually shown in hospitalized criminals who have psychopathy. So if disturbed criminals have the same key personalities as business owners and managers and CEOs, what goes wrong? If you have charm and you have persuasiveness and a lack of empathy and egocentricity, and that gets you to the top, what got you to the bottom? And the difference is that one group of people is antisocial, one group of people is law breaking, or caught doing heinous acts, which is law breaking. Because we could talk about, other people that are currently scamming and everything. Business owners do that too. But one particular person got caught for law breaking. This person may be physically aggressive or violent. This person may be very impulsive, more impulsive than the business owners. And the other group of people may have the inverse attributes. And that makes all the difference. So there are other studies that were trying to see the difference between functional and non-functional psychopaths. So they're trying to say whether psychopathy is a spectrum or whether psychopaths are just in a whole league of themselves. So when Mehmet Mahmoud, who studies at Macquarie University, actually picked up the patterns of brain dysfunction in the orbital frontal cortex, he had separated two groups, the criminal and the non-criminal, and seen whether there was any sort of difference in between their brains. And basically what they learned was that there were dimensional differences rather than concrete differences. So it's not necessarily that biologically these two psychopaths are different, but rather they are in some sort of continuum. there are different levels. So when Dutton had asked a group of first years what job would be the best fit for being ruthless, fearless, amoral, very focused, they had put, you would be a CEO, you would be a spy, you would be a surgeon, you would be a politician or in the military, a serial killer, and also an assassin. Whew. All right, so we touched on a lot of things, and this was only chapter 1. And like I told you, it's going to be hard to do a 4-part series and keep it under an hour. But among the things that we touched on, there are occupations that require attributes that may fit within the profile of being a psychopath. But how does that fare with being in relationships? How does being this way and fearless and immoral and insensitive fare with being in a relationship? And what I'm about to say can be very triggering. So if you were abused in a relationship and you're still healing from that, then please, I advise you to stop here. So relationship experts Neil Jacobson and John Goodman, written the book When Men Batter Women, actually split up relationship abusers into 2 categories, cobras versus pit bulls. And he actually observed cardiovascular profiles in abusive partners that are more relaxed when beating up their partner than just lounging in a chair with their arms closed. Cobras act more swiftly and ferociously and remain in control and become actually more calm and focused before they abuse. They tend to be a little bit more severe when it comes to abusing their partners, as opposed to pit bulls who are prone to let things fester and before just flying off the handle, and they tend to be less severe. Both are abusers, both are horrible, but one is more severe than the other. So a lot of people can become fearless because they literally train themselves after repeat exposure to danger to actually have more courage and bring about more fearlessness. But some people are just claiming it as their birthright. They never had an ounce of fear. So going back to the relationships and actually the cardiovascular profiles of people that actually become calm when they're about to abuse their partner. So there was an actual test from Villian Mahica Parodi that collected sweat from first-time skydivers versus sweat from treadmill walkers. So they did their relative activities and then they collected the sweat right after. They did the science thing, put it in a box, waved it under the noses of different volunteers to see what they actually can collect from brain activities, right? People who showed more activity in their fear processing part of their brains were smelling the skydiver's sweat versus people who were smelling just the sweat from the person who was walking on the treadmill. So they had them do different tests where both groups had to look at neutral faces versus angry faces and threatening faces, happy faces, and everything. And the people who were smelling the fearful sweat actually caught onto these faces a little bit more quickly than people who were smelling the exercise sweat. This test was here to show that fear, in fact, is contagious. That we react to fear maybe because the people around us are fearful and not actually that we have fear, but we're sensing it from other people. So Dutton, in his genius mind, actually had volunteers sniff skydiver sweat, first-time skydiver sweat versus exercise sweat, and had them do a series of activities where they had to assess their risk. And naturally, people who smell this skydiver sweat were a little bit more cautious and fearful of making decisions that were more risky, rather than people who were smelling the exercise sweat was just making more riskier decisions than those people. But the only people who did not make decisions based off of sweats and different types of sweat, and they were indiscriminate of that, were psychopaths. They remained calm at all times and they made more riskier decisions. So psychopaths are risky as fudge, okay? Don't get married to a psychopath because they're risky. They might just sell your house over playing cards. So in essence, some of us are immune to picking up unfair, and some of us actually have a nose for it. And this book doesn't want to say that, oh, being a psychopath is wise when it comes to age and experience and lived experience, but actually by their innate functionings of just their being. There is something about them that we can actually learn from. And the distinction of a psychopath is that they really don't care. They don't care about society and what they think of them. Okay? They don't care what society says. They don't care what is the repercussion. You know, and to an extent, I wish that I was the same way, because I'm not. Like, I care too much. And that may be an obstacle that I have to eventually overcome in life, that many psychopaths are apt to just being born with. So, who is the psychopath, if not the monsters that we believe them? What goes on in their head? Are psychopaths truly on a spectrum, or are they in a league of their own? What are other theories as to why psychopathy would be in our lineage? And like all genes, how is the psychopathy gene actually adapting now? So we're going to continue to discuss that in remaining chapters. Thanks for watching.